Welcome, everybody, for those of us joining us live, and also for those of us that are watching the playback and from the webinar library. I'd like to welcome you to our visit this afternoon with Rob Evans and Michael Thompson, and I'll just turn it over to them.
Thanks, David. It's nice to see you all. Seeing many of you again, and we're glad to be able to spend some time with you. I'm going to say a couple of general things by way of introduction, and Michael's going to then handle the first and actually largest point that we want to make with you. We will, as David said, expect to use the first half of this time to share these thoughts with you, and then we're going to be eager to hear back from you and talk with you and so on about your experience and questions and whatever it may be. So Michael and I were both very active in schools after 9/11, which was, of course, unforgettable. And we were active in schools after 2008 with the great financial meltdown. And this current crisis feels like it's the worst of both of those put together and then some, because it's so large and so uncertain and so potentially lethal and so on. And it also poses a real threat to schools of all kinds, certainly including small ones that don't have large endowments, but actually even to larger ones, to boarding schools around the nation and so on, lots of places. Things are very, very uncertain. And we've spent a lot of our life working in schools, and we've each done a lot of crisis-related work in schools. When there's been a death, a suicide, even a murder, a sex abuse scandal of some sort, huge financial something that blew up. So we've had a chance to learn a lot about that, and to watch and work with heads leading schools in a crisis. And we want to share some thoughts about that. I think, as you're going to hear, we're not going to say, somebody's talking, I don't know. We're not going to bring anything to you that you don't know about, or that you haven't heard before, or that you haven't done probably, because our view is that in the midst of a crisis like this, what you do is fall back to the essentials, and you start there, and that an awful lot of what turns out to be really helpful to people and helpful in the leading of people is simple and basic. It's not always easy, but it's simple and basic. And so what we're going to try to do is sort of outline some of those essentials for you as we see it, and then we'll be glad to hear back from you. And Michael's going to start us off.
We're going to give you, for those of you who like to take notes or want to know that we have an outline, we're giving you four C's and an E, okay? And the first C is courage. What your community needs to know is that, as scary as this is, and it's terrifying for everybody, not at every moment, but it is scary for everybody, is that their head of school is has found her courage, has found his courage, and has found a way to manifest that courage and lead forward. After the 2008 financial collapse, head of a boarding school in upstate New York called me and said, I've got parents, including a board member, asking when I'm going to write a letter about the economic collapse and the financial collapse and share my thoughts on it. He said, I'm not an economist. I'm reading the papers. I'm a lay person. I don't have any additional knowledge. I mean, why would people turn to the head of school for that? And I said, well, they're not actually asking you to be a specialist in the financial markets. They're asking you to share your thinking and how you personally are processing what's happening, because they want to see if you're steady. They want to see if you found your courage and your clarity. And if you have, they can. When I was a late adolescent, I had a bunch of fears, and including a really quite gripping fear of heights. And I wanted to get over it. It seemed unmanly to me. And I went as a student to Hurricane Island Outward Bound School in the middle of Penobscot Bay, Maine. And they did a lot of rappelling down granite cliffs. And it was very terrifying for me. Anybody ever rappelled off a cliff where you walk backwards off a cliff? You got a rope, but it's if you have a fear of heights.
Yeah, what I say is that's what you've all been doing in your jobs anyway, is rappelling off of cliffs.
It's true. I managed to succeed in doing it without wetting my pants. But I remember having gone down the cliff and be standing at the bottom and watching another boy who got halfway down the cliff and then just froze. He went into, he was stricken with fear. And he couldn't go up and he couldn't go down. And he just clung to the rock face. And he was stuck there. And everybody was thinking, oh my God, what'll be, how do we, you know. And the fellow was an Australian fellow who was teaching the climbing. And he very quickly put on a harness himself and got a rope. And he rappelled down. So he was just next to the boy. And I remember I was fascinated, riveted by watching what he did. He just hung there and he didn't pat the boy. He didn't reassure him. He didn't exhort him or urge him. He just stayed with him and talked quietly with him. And it was as if time had stood still. The connection was so powerful, we couldn't overhear the conversation. But it was very low key and very intense. And then after what seemed a long time, I couldn't believe that the instructor hadn't resorted to some sort of more military style exhortation. But this boy found his courage again and came down the rest of the rock face on his own and had the satisfaction that came from having done it. The kind of leadership that you exert in your communities is, to me, that kind of quiet, connected courage. Look, we're in the middle of one of the most toxic mixes I've ever seen in my lifetime. I'm 72 years old. There's a fear of death. Everybody is worried that they could get the virus and die of it. I'm 72 years old. I'm tired of reading. I'm in the high risk category. But my grandchildren are worried about Pop-Pop and because we are at risk. But even if you're not in the high risk group yourself, you have parents who are, or you have a partner who's been through chemo, or you have a child with a suppressed immune system. Everybody's worried about themselves or somebody else dying. We have no idea how long this is going to go on. I mean, my guru in all of this, like many of us, is Tony Fauci. And I listen to him talk, and there's just a lot that he's very humble about what he can't predict. He can't tell us what's going to happen. And if Tony Fauci can't tell us what's going to happen, who can? We have to live with just a gigantic amount of uncertainty and helplessness it generates. There are also huge financial concerns. People worried about not having work, not having enough cash in the bank, not being able to pay tuition, and schools are worried that their parents won't be able to pay tuition, and they can't keep the doors open. And through all of this, there's also a giant thread of grief. There was an article in the Harvard Business Press, which is not my usual psychological go-to, but somebody wrote a very good article that was sent to me called "The Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief," and a lot of anticipatory grief. From the beginning, we've been grieving what's lost, that is, for most of us, the rest of the school year. And then would we have graduation? No, well, we'll grieve that. And will there be outside play or summer camps for these children? Can we open the doors in the fall? And Rob and I were talking yesterday with a head who was way, way out in front, already well into the fall grieving. And we said, it's important not to grieve that far ahead. You have to stay with your community and just manifest your courage. I wrote about courage and leadership 10 years ago in Independent School Magazine. If you want to look it up, it's called Courageous Headship. And I wrote a piece with Rick Melvoin, with whom I had served as more than 15 years at Belmont Hill School, boys' school in Massachusetts. And we lived through the deaths of kids in car accidents and the untimely deaths of faculty member and the suicide of a boy. And I'm sure many of you have lived through those things. And what I saw and what I see when I visit schools is that effective leaders are leaders who have grown in courage. And I look to philosophers and writers to find out how they defined courage. What was their definition of courage? And I got a lot of definitions, put a number of them in that article. But the one that I fell in love with came from Eleanor Roosevelt, who had a tragic girlhood. She was orphaned by the age of 10 and turned over to a cold-hearted, sadistic grandmother who didn't love her and had no use for her. And she grew up insecure and shy and thinking of herself as quite homely, and then married her charismatic, confident cousin, Franklin, and imagined she would live in his shadow. But over the course of her life, she grew ever more courageous and became one of the most respected and influential women in the world. And she actually wrote about the growth of her own courage, and that's the quotation I want to read you because I think that's where all of you are. She wrote, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do." I believe there have been moments for every one of you where you've thought, I'm not sure we can do this. I'm not sure I can do this. I'm not sure right? But then you look fear in the face and you find yourself moving forward. And because you do, the parents in your community are better able to, your teachers are better able to, and your kids are better able to. Everybody looks to an authority figure or a parent figure. In the way that in moments of fearful moments, you look the way you did as a child when you were upset and you went to your mother and you threw your distress into her, your worry, your fear, your anxiety. And because she was calm, because she could absorb it, name it, identify it, and calm you, that did it for you. And it still does it when you're the leader of a community. So now I'm going to turn to Rob and have him talk about the very specific ways in which you can manifest courage for your community.
So what I love about the anecdote that Michael talked about the cliff is not just that, any head of school is doing a cliff-hanging job in some way. It's actually that the story is not about somebody coming to rescue, in that sense, the boy, but to accompany the boy and to make it possible for him to do what he needed to do on his own. And in many ways, I think that same thing applies to you because there may be some specific things you can do and will have to do to help save your school from this or that or the other piece of trouble. But an awful lot of it is arranging things so that other people can do what they need to do, and all together you then manage to make this work. And I want to say, before I get into my specifics about how you manifest the courage, something I sometimes forget, but I told actually those of you who were at the conference, the heads conference where I was not all that long ago, that from a head of school, I had learned a distinction that's very important to me that you can make between a problem and a dilemma. And this, the head would say that a problem has a solution and you fix it. And a dilemma is built into the circumstance and you cope with it, but you don't fix it permanently. So to me, a problem is like the exhaust system on your car is dragging, get it replaced, it's fixed. A dilemma is like being a parent. It's incurable. You have children, that's what we say, but you have to let them go. You love them, but you could kill them. They make you feel proud and fulfilled, but terrified and furious. It's wonderful being with them. It's fabulous getting away from them, which of course nobody can do right now in many parts of the country. And you're not helpless. You cope. You cope. But the distinction is you don't cope once and then it's done. Because the difference here is about expectations. Anything we read as a problem, we expect going to be fixed. I'm going to fix it. You're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. If it doesn't stay fixed, we have to wonder what went wrong and who screwed up. Anything we read as a dilemma, we expect to take constructive action, but we're not surprised when we have to revisit it because there's something built in about it. If ever there was a dilemma, this is surely it. Michael will probably say later that this has felt to him like one great big national experiment in online learning, for example. So there are lots of pieces of this that are a dilemma and that don't have a fix. But what we have are some simple things that actually can make a positive difference. So for me, the second C for me would be connection. One of the key things that a leader can do in a school community especially is to be the orchestrator and the monitor of connection. And this is not the same as being a person who oversees a flood of communication. Michael and I have already heard from a number of heads about teachers who are so conscientious and so eager to make everything work right in this awful circumstance that they have been deluging their students and the parents with communications, 10 emails a day and so on, to the point where the families are saying enough, right? So what I'm talking about is connection, and connection means actually linking up with somebody in a way that's meaningful to them, not only providing them information, but a little more than that. And I'm going to circle back to that at the end, but it's the place where I begin and where I finish, thinking about connecting to people, first to your faculty and staff, eventually to your parents, to the kids. And the more of that you're able to arrange that's meaningful to people, the stronger they're going to be during this time, and the stronger their sense of commitment is likely to be to your school. So the second one for me is candor. You know, Michael and I are not psychologists who believe in giving people bland reassurance. There, it's going to be fine. You try to comfort people that way. Most people I know are not comforted that way. People are actually comforted much more when they feel they've gotten an authentic piece of you, that you've dealt with them directly in a straight way. Now, you all know, because you're heads of school, that there are some things you can't be candid about. You can't say everything. But being willing to say as much as you can of what you're allowed to say, that's a good way to think about being candid. So, you know, one example, if it doesn't seem too grandiose, is Winston Churchill, who it seemed at times was single-handedly sustaining London and England during World War II. And one of the reasons he was, people were so willing to follow him was because he pretty much said it straight. There were times when he withheld information about military losses because he thought it would damage morale. He didn't say everything. But there were tons of times in Parliament and elsewhere where he minced no words about what they were up against and how dangerous the enemy was and how powerful and so on. Being Churchill, of course, he had that same kind of bulldog, you know, we're going to win no matter what. But he didn't gild the lily in the way that many political leaders are inclined to do. And when you can be candid, I'm going to give you an example in a couple minutes. As much as you can, it's a good way to inspire people, as opposed to beating around the bush and feeding them stuff that you hope they'll find encouraging when really it isn't so. The next one for me is clarity. So I'm a believer in clarity, period, in leadership, and especially in schools, but particularly in times like this. And by clarity, what I mean is that people really benefit from knowing what's negotiable and what isn't. Right? And you're the head of school and you get to say that. Now, I don't know all of your schools, but Michael and I both have been in hundreds, each of us, independent schools. And virtually every one of them, small or large, has at least one, if it's a small school, and if it's an upper school and large, it's likely to have a number of faculty who are devoted to the school, to their students, to their subject matter, all that stuff. Terrific people, but who are a pain to manage and who pick nits all the time and who remind me years and years ago, the New Yorker had a regular columnist based in Paris, Janet Flanner. And she used to write about French sort of culture and so on, society terrifically. And at one point there was a huge long garbage strike in Paris. They're always having strikes in France. And she said in this story, I've never forgotten this, that in France, there's no such thing as a garbage strike. There is only a question of the future of Western civilization, because that's how they talk about garbage strikes in France. And you have faculty members who are likely to do that. So here's one side effect advantage of the current crisis. You get a chance to throw your weight around and tell those people what's what. And they will be grateful. All but a couple, and those ones you just have to blow them off. Most of them are as scared as anybody else and will be grateful to know from their leader what's what. So you may need to say to your faculty, we're doing X and we're going to do Y and we will not be doing Z. Right? And maybe X is flat out the way you say it, they have to do it. Maybe Y, we have to do it, but we're going to talk together about it. Not X, but about Y we would. But Z, we're not doing that, that's off limits. Most people, most of us would rather work for somebody we disagree with, but who's clear, than someone we seem to agree with who isn't. And there's a tremendous amount to be said for being clear, because among other things, your faculty won't have to wonder, what the hell is she thinking? What the hell is he thinking? They'll actually know. There's a way in which this applies beyond your faculty and staff, however. It's in these times, it's very helpful to parents at home to offer some basic clarity. So, for example, one of the things most parents don't know is what to expect from online learning. Should my kid be sitting in front of the computer screen for as long as she was normally in class? What's it going to be? Should it be less? Are they covering everything? It's nice if a short thing goes home that says, we're learning about online learning. Here's our plan. We will not be covering every single item that was on the list. We have paired ourselves to an essential core part of the curriculum because for students of this age, it's not reasonable to expect them to spend more than X amount of time in front of the computer and so on. Here's what you should expect, that kind of thing. When people get that, not in a bossy way, but in a kind of straight ahead way from the school's leader, they calm down. It can have a very calming effect. And the E that Michael mentioned after the C's for me, is empathy. And this will bring us back to connection. One of the things you can do that's terrific, can be terrifically helpful to just about anybody you have to deal with, is to be able to have your empathy hat on. And I want to be clear that this does not mean that you have to be doing psychotherapy with people and spending 45 minutes a person finding out all about how they're doing and so on. What it does mean is that being able to make regular, actual connections with your faculty, for example, is a great way to sustain them and their performance. So what would that mean? Well, I know a number of heads who, when they have a faculty meeting like this on Zoom, start off with a couple of minutes where people check in. How's it going? We heard yesterday about one where and a faculty of about 30 people. She went all the way around, and they each had to say a couple of sentences about how they were doing, which they were very grateful for. I know other ones where they pick out, they would say, so David, how are you doing? James, how are you doing? Things like that. And, it wouldn't be a bad idea to plan over the next 3 weeks or so to connect by phone briefly with every faculty member. And if you're in a large school, you'll need your administrative team to help you do this. You wouldn't do it all. In a small school, maybe you can. Just to check in, how's it going? Not just the teaching, but the managing, sort of all the deal. When people feel that someone above me cares about me, there's a huge Gallup poll research on this, that when people work in organizations where they feel that someone above them really cares about their development and how they're doing, that morale and engagement in work are notably higher. It's one of the best things you can absolutely do. And here's how it connects to the other things. You may have a faculty member who will come to you online or call or whatever. Am I going to have a job next year? And the honest answer may be that you don't know yet, because there's so much yet to happen, and you don't know what the finances are. You don't know what the enrollment picture is going to be like, et cetera. And you'd like to say yes. I mean, maybe one or two you'd like to say no. Actually, I've been waiting to get rid of you for years, and this is my opportunity. But apart from that, you would actually want to be able, and you can't. So before you give the answer, if you want to do a little empathy, here's what you do. You say, gee, tell me what you were concerned about. And the person says, well, I don't have that many kids in my elective course this year, and made me think maybe you'd want to get rid of me. Or the person says, my spouse just got fired, and we'd have nothing if I lose this, or whatever. And it's not a huge deal, but a couple of minutes back and forth. And then you say candidly as much as you can, which might be something like this. I honestly don't know the answer at this minute. I'd love to say yes for sure, but I'd be lying because I can't. There's too much uncertainty at the moment. The board is going to have to weigh in about this, et cetera, about our money. However, here's what I can tell you. I want us to be opening next year as the strongest school we can be. Ideally, I'd like us to open the way we've been. I'm going to be working on this as hard as I can. I'm going to follow up on it. I'm going to stay in touch with you. As I get more info, I will tell you. And if you have any questions en route here as we go, don't hesitate to come back and ask me. It's short, it's direct, it's honest. What they wish you would say is, yes, you have a job. But if you can't say that, they're going to feel much better that you, A, were empathic, and B, were direct. It's a wonderful combination at any time, and especially in this time. So we have more we could add, but we very much want to hear from you, and we specifically earmarked time for this. We may not have touched yet on something that's important for you. There are things we haven't talked about at all, like the board and other sorts of stuff. There may be things we said that you want us to clarify or explain or even apologize for. So we've left some time here, and we're a small enough group that we hope you'll just raise your hand kind of right there where we can see you, and unmute yourself and we can talk. Questions?